Do you like a dreamy, ethereal, epic look to your photographs? Well, if you do, you've come to the right video. In today's Quickstop Photoshop video, we're going to talk about the Orton blur. That's right, you heard me correctly. One of the most popular techniques amongst landscape photographers, and you're about to find out why. Before we jump right into it, I want to give a brief overview of what the Orton blur is and why we use it. So we use it to get that dreamy ethereal look, and that's done by taking the shadows and the highlights of your photograph and blending them together, kind of softening the details. In the technique we're going to use, we're also going to put in some contrast for some extra punch and extra dynamic pow. So let's jump right into it. For today's video, I chose an image from Iceland. It's in the Highlands. It was a very gray, gloomy day, so the light is very flat. Because of this, the Orton blur is going to have a big effect on this image because we still do have some texture in our hills. I usually like to do the Orton blur as one of the very first things. That way I have a nice base layer to build up off of that moving forward in my editing workflow. So let's start by making a copy of our base layer. The reason we do this is because we're going to reduce the opacity on this Orton blur layer, and we need something underneath of it to shine through. So let's jump right up to filter on our new layer. We're going to go to blur. We're going to go to Gaussian blur. Gaussian blur is the backbone of the Orton blur. The next thing we'll notice is we have the pixel radius. So a good rule of thumb, pick something that's at or near the megapixels in the camera that you shot with. So for example, I shot with a Mark IV 5D Canon, which is about 30.4 megapixels. So I've found anywhere from 30 to 36 works well. I'm gonna do 36 here. So let's hit OK. Now we have a nice blurry image and we're finished. Just kidding, we're not finished. So let's reduce our opacity down to 30. We're still a bit higher than we're gonna end up, but the reason is we're gonna do some contrast now and I wanna really see what we're doing. So that's why our opacity is a little bit high. So let's open up a levels layer. You can go up to adjustments and click on levels, or you can do Command L or Control L on a PC. Here we've got our levels. You can see our nice histogram. We're gonna take our highlight slider and we're gonna pull it to the left into like the midtones area. And you'll see our highlights brighten up in our image. And then we're gonna take our midtone slider and we're gonna crunch it real nice against that highlight slider to give it some of that really poppy contrast. We don't want to do too much, but it's going to look pretty ugly. I'm purposefully doing this over the top because we are going to reduce our opacity. And then let's take our shadow slider, and I always like to just bring it up until it's kissing the edge of the histogram there. All right, so once we're happy with what we've got here, let's hit OK. And let's reduce the opacity down to 0 to let our eyes adjust back to the normal image. Once they are adjusted, let's slowly creep up the opacity until we hit something we like. So I usually stop between 10 and 12. Some people like to do more, some people like to do less. You do you. All right, let's look at the before and after just from the Orton blur, and we can see it's already had a big effect. If we zoom in here a bit, we can see that the textures have been softened and we have a little bit of contrast. It's even a little bit more saturated. If we look up here, when the Orton blur is on, we're going to see this dark ridgeline right here is kind of bleeding into the sky, and that's what the Orton blur does. It blends the shadows into the highlights and vice versa. So you can see a before and after, and we get this dark haloing here, and that we don't want. It gets worse as we edit further into our image. So let's get rid of that immediately. We're gonna make a mask on our Orton blur. We're gonna get our brush at 100% opacity. We're gonna make sure that we kind of brush that out along the ridgeline here. And then we wanna do a bit into the sky so we can have a nice transition from no Orton blur to Orton blur. And then once we've done that, you can see we removed that dark halo. So we're good there. Part of the Orton blur is that it does soften the details in the image. You could stop there if you like a soft look to your photograph, but I like to recover some of those textures to give it a little more clarity. And that's the next thing we're gonna do here. We're gonna create a new merge visible, and you can do that hotkeys on a Mac, Shift Option Command E, and on a PC, I believe it is Shift Control Alt E. So there's a couple ways to do this. We could do a high pass filter. You could open up Adobe Camera Raw and increase the clarity using the clarity slider. The way I like to do it is using something called the Nik Collection. And this is a very powerful plugin with a bunch of awesome filters and effects that I use a lot in my editing, but they do have a free version, and I will make another video very shortly showing you how to get that free version. So I do recommend you download Nik Collection. So we're gonna go to Filter, Nik Collection, and then there's this Color Effects Pro. So we're gonna select this on our new merge visible layer. Once it's open, we're gonna go over to the left here. We're gonna select nature or landscape. I believe it's in both. And we're gonna go down to tonal contrast. And you can see here the default settings are disgusting. So let's reset these all to 0. And we're gonna slowly go through here and bump these up. I never go more than 10 to 15%. This technique I learned from Ryan Dyer on Recovering Textures. If you don't know Ryan Dyer, he's an awesome landscape photographer. I recommend going to his website, checking out his tutorials, and his photography is amazing. What tonal contrast is doing, it's a local adjustment technique, and we're gonna kind of redefine that edge between the shadows and the highlights to give it some more clarity and a little bit more pop, if you will. So let's take the highlights and adjust them up. I usually almost always go to 10%. And then midtones, I'm gonna probably hit an 8. And then shadows, maybe, since we do have some dark shadows down here, I'm not gonna push it too much, so maybe a 3. And then saturation, I'm gonna leave alone. There's better ways to handle saturation. And we'll see before and after, it brings back some of that clarity. It might be hard to see on your phone or on your computer, but believe me, when you do it yourself, you'll notice. So we're gonna hit OK. And just to further demonstrate what we did here, let's zoom in and you'll see the before and the after of the textures recovery layer. And that does add a lot more clarity back. And so now you'll see though, we still do have that Orton blur effect. Here's before both layers and after. Really brought a lot of life to our flat image. And now we have a nice base layer to start doing light bleeding and dodging. And we have that nice painterly look that I always go after. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please leave a comment down below of some future topics you want me to cover. I'm so happy to read those. Also, please subscribe and keep a lookout for that Nik Collection video. I'm gonna make a really quick one just on how to get the free Nik Collection so you don't have to pay for the full one. All right, guys, I will see you next time.